Hey, Scottie Kimmelman here with the National Sports Media Association, and today I'm joined with the 2023 Idaho Sportscaster of the Year and the voice of the University of Idaho Vandals, Chris King. Chris, how are you today?
Scotty, I'm doing well. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat here. This is great.
Of course, yeah. Thanks for hopping on. And before we get into your current work broadcasting with the basketball and football games at the University of Idaho, I want to ask what really got you into sportscasting in the first place?
Been a sports fan as long as I can remember, and just really since I was a little kid, what would be my way to be around sports? And I had a passion for sports, a passion for once I saw like, gosh, there are broadcasters that they get paid to do this, that they can have a living doing this, and as long as I can really remember, I remember the librarian in elementary school, I got a reading award, and he said someday we'll hear Chris talk about sports on the radio. So as long as I can remember, so it was really trying to get into that and doing all I could. And I did my first game when I was 15. I was very fortunate, and just from there, kind of every spot up that you could to the next opportunity. And I've been very lucky that here I am now at the University of Idaho, which is a great spot. And yeah, it takes a lot of breaks. It takes hard work, but a lot of good fortune has to come your way. And I've been lucky to be on the right end of that.
Yeah, great. That's awesome. And going to universities such as Washington State, we talked about getting into your work and into the University of Idaho, but I want to talk about your time at Washington State specifically. I'm sure it must have been a huge help for you getting into broadcasting in general, but can you tell me a moment or maybe just an example of your time at Washington State that got you really more so into broadcasting?
Yeah, you did your homework. So yeah, I went to WSU, and for those who aren't familiar, WSU in the University of Idaho, it's in an area called the Palouse, and it's a little more remote. There's not as much by it besides these two schools, but it's right on the border. So it's about a 15-minute drive from WSU to the University of Idaho. So it's just the way that life worked out that back here on the Palouse, but. For me, actually, when I was at WSU, it's a really good broadcasting school. It's the Edward R. Murrow College of Communications. So I was really fortunate to learn from a lot of great folks there. But I'd say my biggest thing is I traveled a lot when I was in college to get opportunities to do games. So I would drive up to Spokane pretty much every Friday throughout the fall and the winter. And it's a little over a 70-mile drive. And our weather around here can be a little dicey during the winter. There are times now where I look back and thought, I don't know if I would have done that drive all over again. But I had a chance. There's a sports radio station in Seattle. They had a show at the time called Varsity Football and Hoops Live, where they covered high school sports around the state. And they didn't have everyone talking about what was going on in Spokane. So that first year didn't get paid. I would just drive up to get maybe 5-ish minutes of airtime on the sports radio station in Seattle, and they were airing the Sonics at that point. So if the Sonics were had a game, it would get delayed even more. So there were sometimes it was like 11 that I would be on, and then from there I did that the first year. Then I got the opportunity to do a bunch of games each week. Comcast at that point was doing some local games that they would put up on demand. So it was just great being at WSU. I learned so much at the school, but also just the opportunities around it. And that was probably the biggest thing was just being able to go up to Spokane, put some miles on the car. But the biggest thing for me at that point, and I would think for anyone else interested in broadcasting, is where can you get reps? Where can you get opportunities? And for that point, those were the opportunities were, and I had a great experience there. And nothing can replicate the opportunity to just get those innings and to log those hours and to hopefully get better and better.
Great. Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm sure working from that experience and going to the University of Idaho must have taken, you said, lots of reps, lots of practice. And I know you cover both basketball and football for the Vandals, as well as minor league baseball games in the West Coast League. So what would you say specifically working in these different sports does to help your broadcasting skills?
Interesting question. I would say the biggest way I look at it is you're building muscles and you're building your broadcasting muscles. And I would say baseball, you probably build those muscles of the fastest just because you've got essentially a 3 hour hunk of time. I look at it like you got this clay and you get to mold it and it's a little bit sink or swim because if you aren't doing a job that's necessarily all that great. It's
Right.
noticeable, but you get this opportunity that, hey, you got to get the action in there, but you can also weave in storytelling, and can you figure out the pace? So
Mm,
I would say baseball is a great one. If you can do baseball, it makes of the main sports basketball easier. Football is a whole different thing too. Just being able to identify the personnel and being able to prepare for that, and there's just so many things that can happen in a football game that you're trying to cut down that buffer time. I always think of it kind of like eye to brain to mouth. The more reps you get, the more you can cut down on eye to brain to mouth, and to just be able to pounce with combining your prep with what happens in the moment. In basketball, there's the pace to it as well. That it definitely takes some getting used to the pace when you're first starting out, on what it takes to be able. You're almost in some ways, at least on the radio side, you're a little bit almost like an auctioneer in some ways, where you gotta be on it as far as the action goes. So it does help that you're less worried about the number of guys on the court compared to football. And it's just different than baseball, but all of those sports just really help. I love doing all of them, and I've maybe been asked in the past about, well, what sport's your favorite? It's like, for me, it's like picking between children. I love them all. In the base
yeah,
in summer, there's nowhere I'd rather be than a ballpark. Fall, there's nowhere I'd rather be than a stadium, and then in the winter, there's nowhere I'd rather be than an arena.
it's awesome. Love it. And you've been the voice for the Vandals for a little over 3 years now doing these sports. And I want to ask, just how has that experience been like for you? You said you've done baseball, all these different sports, but I want to talk about your time specifically with the Vandals. How has that been for you?
It's been wonderful, and the University of Idaho is such a great place, and it's fun to be at a school that has a nickname too, where the people know it. And no offense to any school that's the Wildcats, but you could be talking about a lot of different schools. But when you say the Vandals, people know the University of Idaho. Our venue for football games is very unique, the Kibby Dome. People know the Kibby Dome, so that part is I love that part. And for me, I've had such a great experience in Moscow. It started back in 2013, 2014 is when I took over doing men's basketball. So I did women's basketball for 2 years at Boise State, and that allowed me to then have the opportunity at the University of Idaho. So it's wild to think, and as I mentioned, it's kind of a little an area where Pullman and Moscow are close to each other. And I went to school at Washington State, and if you had told me at the time that I'd have a wife, I'd have a child, would have a house on the Palouse. I wouldn't have guessed that necessarily, that that's where my path would have brought me when I was going to school at WSU. But it is a wonderful area. It's such a high quality of life, and it's nice too. At the University of Idaho, Moscow doesn't necessarily have the biggest population in the
Mm,
state, but in turn it gives us a really good radio network where we're down at Boise, we're in spots all across the state where miles wise we're not necessarily close, but the University of Idaho has a big, footprint just across the state of people who care about the Vandals. So, and it worked out great. So I did men's basketball from 2013, 2014 on, and just the way it was set up when I got at Idaho, there was a different broadcaster for football and a different broadcaster for basketball, and it was, a big break, because when you do this, you want to kind of, be the voice of the school and do the two sports that get the most coverage and are on the most stations and have the most listenership. So when it did happen, where football was open and the opportunity, I really appreciate everyone in Idaho, and it was like, I think it came up in the morning and it was all greenlit by the afternoon to take over football. So to do them both, and we've had some football success recently, which is just it's neat to see a community rally around and embrace. And when I say the community, not only the local community, but kind of the school community that has goes across not only Idaho but the West Coast and across the country, to see what happens when a football program is doing well. So it's a fun time, and I'm really really fortunate for my role at Idaho.
great. That's awesome to hear. And I when I introduced you, I mentioned that you're the NSMA sportscaster here in Idaho. And this is your second one as well. What does it mean for you to be thought of by your peers like that?
It is it's very humbling. I don't know any other way to say it. There's a really good broadcasting tradition at the University of Idaho. There have been a lot of great broadcasters, but the one who's done it the longest was a gentleman who's a Vandal legend named Bob Curtis, and I
Right.
believe he won it 33 times. He won that
Wow.
award. So I he's it's like playing James Bond is my analogy. He's Sean Connery, and the rest of us are, try to carve out our own path. So it is neat though to be at a spot that values broadcasting and has such a great tradition of broadcasting. But it is incredibly humbling. It's not something that I take for granted. It is a really humbling thing, and I just know folks who have won it before. Bob Beeler's a very close friend from Boise State. He's won it before, so to be, in anything, and it's the same, same breath as him in any way, shape, or form, to win an award that he's won is that really means a lot to me because he's been a great friend and mentor. And Tom Morris is my boss at the University of Idaho. He's our GM for Vandal Sports Properties. He used to do the broadcast. He won it before, and he has been just such a big part of my career. And I'm so thankful for him. How many people get to do this job who have a boss who was a broadcaster and a award-winning broadcaster, so they understand, what the job is like. So it's really something that is very, very special.
Yeah, great. Well, yeah, hopefully you can get to 33 someday.
Yeah,
Uh,
I gotta live 33 more. That's what I
yeah,
think about when
exactly.
I see there's a plaque outside of the radio booth that honors him. It's the Bob Curtis press box, and every
Yeah.
time I see it, and I think of that part, I'm like, I'm gonna live 33 more years. I mean, that it blows the mind. Just and that's how great of a broadcaster that he was.
There you go. Well, obviously, there's a much larger path for you. I mean, you're obviously doing such an amazing job. And I got to ask, for an aspiring broadcaster such as myself, countless others in the industry that are my age too, what advice would you give them? What would you tell them if they were asking, what advice would you give me?
Biggest thing would be reps. And I would say that the exciting thing is now, and I'm in my mid 30s, so I'm not crazy old, but things have changed a lot from when I was in college or when I was in high school and trying to, I remember reading Gary Bender's broadcasting book when I was in high school and just devouring it. And actually, I think that's still a great book. And every bit of information on the internet, learning about the industry, even jobs you weren't anywhere close to qualified for in high school and college, reading about them, seeing what it takes, are the job qualifications. But the biggest thing would just be reps. So I'd say the barrier to entry, even from when I started, I got to do games in high school, but it was on a public access channel. It was a big
Yeah.
deal. They had to wire our entire high school gym and had a great relationship with the local cable provider to do games that were live on TV. Now, I mean, you think about what you can do on YouTube, what you can do as far as a lot of conferences, even you're talking colleges are on ESPN Plus, and they need people to do these games. Especially, it's so great the number of games that are broadcast now, or maybe volleyball or soccer would have had little to no games broadcast in the past, and now they have a nice production on ESPN Plus or other streaming services. So I would say the biggest thing is to go out there and do reps. A lot of the people that I've learned from, and even I've done myself, if you need tape, if you want to try a sport, sit in the stands, get a auxiliary booth, sit courtside. People, there's an enthusiasm with this that people want to help you, and I'm that way too. If anyone watches this at all and I can help in any way, because I love this. This is what I'm passionate about. What I do for my job is my passion.
Yeah.
And I love talking about it. I love sharing ideas. I love learning from others, whatever I might know. I love passing along. So people really are very receptive, I have found, if you are, enthusiastic and ambitious and want to find a way to get better. So the biggest thing would just be reps, whether that's making yourself available for doing games, you entry level jobs and then moving your way up. But there's a lot more now that can be done just with the number of games that are streamed. I think there's a lot of opportunity too, where people might know a lot about football, basketball, baseball, just because we grew up with those games as those being the top ones as far as ratings go. But other sports, if you can wrap your arms around other sports, the coaches, the players, their families, they really appreciate that. They really embrace that when you learn the sport and you learn their stories. So I guess just rounding back to that biggest thing is reps. The best thing anyone can do is just to get as much experience as possible because there's no substitute for it.
Yeah, that's amazing advice. Love it. Well, that's all for me. Thank you again for joining. I really appreciate the time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Congratulations again.
Thank you.
All right, appreciate it.